Hello out there, and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan, and we are about halfway through fall camp. 2 more Saturdays. Well, I guess 3 more if you count this coming Saturday, but 2.5 weeks until opening kickoff against Old Dominion. In honor of fall camp, we have a very special deal going on just this week. It actually expires at midnight tomorrow. So if you're listening to this now or listening to this on Friday, you should get in on it. If you use promo code CAMPSCOOP24, that's all one word, all capitalized, that will allow you 75% off of Gamecock Scoop Premium at checkout. So go to GamecockScoop.com, hit sign up in that top right corner, and use CampScoop24. That's pretty good deal. So you get $25 for an entire year of Gamecock Scoop Premium. Anyway, before we get into, am I like really fuzzy?
No, you're good.
Sound. Okay, I feel like I'm like too loud. Anyway, before we get too far into all the fall camp stuff, which there's a lot to get to, including the first scrimmage of fall camp, I did want to talk about recruiting real quick. We usually try to start off with the recruiting when we can. Over the weekend, South Carolina started to see a little bit of what Darren Usher can do. That would be the new director of player development that came in over the summer. You picked up a 4-star linebacker out of Alabama, Oxford, Alabama, in Keenan Britt. And really, he tied a lot of how he ended up in Columbia to Usher. Said that Darren Usher started recruiting him when he was at Oregon. I know Usher also spent some time at Auburn, and I think that's where he first heard about Britt. We have some more details on that on GamecockScoop.com if you want to go check that out. Scroll back a few days. But that's another nice 4-star add to the 2026 class. And yeah, maybe a little bit of a sign for the future of what those relationships that the director of player development, personnel, recruiting, there's so many different titles, but what having some fresh blood in there might do for the recruiting. So definitely something to keep an eye on. And I guess kind of along the same vein, obviously South Carolina did have a highly rated 2026 QB committed earlier in the process with Landon Duckworth, who decommitted a few months ago. So they've got several offers out there for some other guys, but one to keep your eye on is Michael Clayton II. That's a 6'4", 195-pound pro-style QB, 4-star, out of Sanford, Florida. And he is going to visit, or he's set to visit right now, South Carolina for the LSU game. So that'll be an opportunity for South Carolina to try to make a statement on a major stage against a major program in front of a pretty heralded recruit. So we'll have obviously a lot more about visits as they start to come up. There's usually a handful of recruits at every home game throughout the season. So a lot of opportunities upcoming there. All right, done with recruiting. Let's talk a little bit about fall camp, and let's start with the scrimmage, because I feel like that's probably the biggest thing that has happened since we last talked. Over the weekend, obviously the scrimmage was closed to media, so we didn't get to watch any of it, but you guys did get to talk to Beamer afterwards, and of course we've kind of got our own sources and stuff that have told us a little bit about what went down. What can you tell me about scrimmage number 1?
You guys will be shocked to learn, as you've heard on every preseason scrimmage podcast for the last 2 years here, and probably for all of football, that the defense is ahead of the offense right now. It's pretty much always how these things go. But I think, especially you look at this roster with the changes of quarterback and offensive line, wide receiver, and the defensive continuity, you would expect the defense to be ahead, and it is. We didn't get a sack number, but it sounds like there were quite a bit of, not the quarterbacks are getting hit right now, but a lot of pressure from everybody involved. That was Kyle Kennard talking about that a little bit earlier this week in media. Michael Smith scored a touchdown. Matthew Fuller scored a touchdown. That's 2 of your freshmen. We know that much. Beamer Smith got a little bit over 100 plays in. Trying to think what else. I've got a story running tomorrow morning, just kind of some players reacting to the scrimmage. That's kind of my main thing, though, I guess. I wanted to get back to Michael Smith because not only did he have a touchdown in the scrimmage we didn't get to see, we had open practice on Sunday, the day after the scrimmage, and they were doing, I guess I'll call it like a fade route drill. They're just kind of doing one-on-ones in the corner of the end zone, like tight ends, receivers against DBs and safeties. And Michael Smith caught a very impressive one-on-one in the corner over Nicky Manwari. Toe tap, got it in the corner. I didn't get a good shot of it, but some other people did on social media. That was as impressive a play as we've seen in any of these open practices from your true freshman tight end over your, junior safety. That Michael Smith's going to play a little bit, guys. I think that's what I'm getting at here. He's a true freshman, but he's going to play a little bit.
Yeah, you can go to our Twitter at Rivals Gamecock and look at some of the footage we did get from that open period. Got some other cool shots.
Bakari Swain had a good play on the other end of that drill too. I can't remember who there was. I think it was Amari Huggins Bruce who made a good pass breakup on in that same drill.
Yeah, that sounds right. But yeah, I also saw that Michael Smith clip, and we kind of glanced over it there, but I think it's notable that he was going up against Nicky Manwari, who is arguably your best DB as well on the team, and was able to make a pretty big play as a true freshman. That's only been here since the summer too, so he wasn't even here in the spring. So making a big impact early. Hearing a lot of good things about the tight end room in general. Obviously, you have
Joshua Simon
coming back. Yeah, Joshua Simon coming back, who we talked a little bit about in spring. He had a strong into the 2023 season. You have Michael Smith, who's 4-star out of Savannah. It was kind of
Brady. You got Brady Hunt
like
too.
we knew that Smith had good size, good speed, all those sorts of things, but he was playing in a little bit of a handicapped division, I guess, in high school. It was like a small Catholic school division or whatever, so it was unclear if the level of competition would translate, but it seems like since he's arrived on campus, it definitely is. I mean, we're talking about a 6'6", 240 guy, 230, 240. Between that, you mentioned Brady Hunt. We also even got like a shout out for Maurice Brown II, who was a walk-on, but good size, and the staff seems to really like him. So to me, it seems
teams last year.
Right. Yeah, a lot of special teams for him. To me, it seems like they're really setting up to run some 2 tight end sets and to maybe use some of these guys in unique ways, especially when you factor in the fact that you don't have that many tall wide receivers. And it seems like maybe the cream that's rising to the top out of that wide receiver group is not necessarily the tall guys. Not that they won't play. I think they'll still make an impact and all, but I just expect to see a lot of diversity in the tight end group and the way that they're used throughout the year this year.
Yeah, for sure. And then you kind of bring that brings me to another point. We also had not a tight end, but we had Casey Henry for media on Tuesday, and he was talking. He was pretty open about just kind of where he's working, what he's doing. He said he's working at right tackle only in team stuff right now, but he's doing left tackle like stance work and stuff on his own. But he, by all accounts, is your starting right tackle right now. He said that, someone asked him about the identity of this team, and he was talking about ground and pound, run the ball, use that term 2 or 3 times. And okay, if that's kind of the formula here, right? If you're running the ball, playing defense, doing the kind of ball control thing, trying to, shorten the game with a Rocket Sanders, with 2 tight end stuff plays right into that, right? If you are basically going to have 7 offensive linemen out there on the 2 tight end sets when you're running the ball, if you're going to, short yardage stuff to kind of just 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and on 3rd and 4, you run a square into Josh Simon or, a fade route to a Michael Smith and just move the chains again, right? Like that's maybe not the most exciting brand of offense, but that I think kind of what Casey Henry was talking about plays right into what we've seen and what we've heard from the tight ends, that you're going to see some 2 tight end stuff. And I think, can you call this team Smash Mouth? Can you call a team that was 129th in rushing last year Smash Mouth, or do we need to see it first?
Hey, I mean, I think you're onto something. You factor that in with everything you just said, plus Sean Elliott returning as run game coordinator. Obviously, those South Carolina teams in which he held that position before were very run heavy. Again, we talked last time about having, Marcus Lattimore at that point, but Rocket Sanders, if he's fully healthy, maybe he doesn't quite elevate to that level, but I don't think he's too far beneath it if he's fully healthy. And then the other factor there is Lenore Sellers can run himself. How much QB run game are they going to actually build into the offense? I mean, we know that he's going to improvise here and there on passing plays and stuff, but it won't surprise me if we see a good bit of zone read, some option concepts. I mean, again, that's all stuff that Sean Elliott's kind of known for as well. So, yeah, I mean, I expect them to focus on the run game. I don't think it's a bad thing to want to control the clock, control the pace of the game, especially because I think, and we've talked about this throughout the offseason, I think the defense is a strength that you can rely on a little bit this year. So those two things can kind of play off of each other.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. And again, I think you just look at the roster construction, you look at the way they went after it in the portal with getting offensive linemen and 3 running backs. They're not obviously you have to be able to throw the ball a little bit. It's modern college football, but if you're just trying to like build out an identity for this team, what are we 16 days from the season opener? I think that kind of tracks. And then also we're talking about designed offense and things like that. It brings me to another thing that kind of caught my eye this week. We had Jared Brown on Tuesday. That's the Coastal Carolina transfer receiver. He didn't get into specifics, obviously. That's playbook stuff, but he did mention that Dowell Loggins is kind of building some stuff for him that he did at Coastal. And without obviously knowing exactly what he's talking about, you go look at what Jared Brown did at Coastal Carolina. It's a lot of end arounds. It's a lot of jet sweeps. It's a lot of kind of stuff outside the tackles, getting the ball in space. What do we think that means in terms of this offense and kind of where Jared Brown fits if they're trying to build a Coastal package for him or at least something like that?
I mean, I think it could be fun, and it also kind of fits into some of Dowell Loggins' background at Arkansas. That first KJ Jefferson breakout year when Kendall Browse is offensive coordinator there, they're running a lot of stuff with Rocket Sanders, but also using some of those slot wide receivers to run in rounds to add a third option in that kind of extended option they do with the spread. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we see Jerry Brown kind of come in motion, sometimes get it, sometimes just be that fake guy before you hand it or keep it if you're Lenore Sellers. I think it could be really fun to watch. I mean, I love that sort of stuff. I'm the guy that when I play NCAA, I play as like old school Georgia Tech, Paul Johnson era,
Oh, yeah.
like I want to have all that misdirection and options. So I'm excited to see it. I know maybe fans would rather them throw deep shots every play or whatever, but for me, I think it could be really, really fun and really, really effective. So
I think what maybe we're getting at here, and you start kind of stacking it up in your head, is you don't really know exactly how this offense is going to work, and obviously none of it's going to matter if the offensive line play is not healthier and better. But there's at least a lot that I think a defense has to account for on a given play, whether that's Rocket Sanders being 1,000-yard guy in the past, whether that's Michael Smith in his frame, Jared Brown in motion. We haven't heard as much about Nick Harbor as we did, last year, but speed speaks for itself. If he's on the field, you got to account for him, even if the ball's not going that way. I think it just gives Dowell Loggins a lot of options, at least. And again, it's all going to come back to line play, and that's going to be the key to the whole deal. But I think there's something to be said for having options and just things that a defense has to be aware of, even though the ball can obviously only go one place on a play.
Yes. Speaking of offensive line, we talked a lot last week, I think, about the increased depth there. And then I did notice after the scrimmage, Beamer mentioned that both Ja'Kai Moore and Marquis Anderson were sidelined for the scrimmage. Is that something that we should be concerned about right now? I mean, I do think that you have a little bit more depth should they not be ready for week 1 than you did last year. But I mean, Ja'Kai Moore, is probably slotted in as a starter prior to this injury.
I don't think it's a lot. We saw Ja'Kai still practicing, just kind of off to the side when we had Sunday. I'd be a little more weary if he's out again this Saturday. They're scrimmaging again Saturday, and it'll be the same thing. We'll get Beamer after that. I'd put a little more stock into it if it's twice, but one missing a scrimmage 3 weeks out isn't as much of a thing as I think people think it is, unless it happens more than once. So we'll see this weekend. I think that about covers scrimmage notes I had. I don't know if you had anything else.
The one more question I had for you is, and it kind of again goes along the offensive line, but Beamer mentioned several pre-snap and holding penalties. I also heard though that this was the first time that they tried to really let the offense kind of fend for itself. Defense is usually better off at this point, and also I think that South Carolina's defense is just the more talented side, at least at this point of 2024. Should we be worried about those mistakes, or is that just kind of like comes with the territory when you have a new quarterback, you have a lot of depth on the offensive line and a bunch of transfers at wide receiver?
That's a good question. I do think it's going to come with the territory, especially if you're going to be playing young offensive linemen. Tree and Tro are still sophomores. Casey Henry's technically a redshirt sophomore, but he's barely played in actual games. If Josiah Thompson gets in there, that's a true freshman. I think the main thing for me is this was the problem last year is you have to be able to stick with a combination this year. I think you kind of saw down the stretch last year once you actually got a little bit going that you were playing better in November, and that's obviously injury related. And you do have depth; you can kind of rotate guys, but I think as much as anything is you need to find your best five, what you think your best five is at least. And really feel like you can stick with that. Because I think the biggest problem last year, as much as anything, was just, again, 9 different combinations the first 9 games? That's just no way to do business as an offense.
Yeah, I agree. And again, just to reiterate, I do think that depth-wise, you're in a much, much better position this year, even if you do have to plug in a few true freshmen. They're very talented. Hopefully you're not going to have to rely on them as every down starters, regardless. What about, before we get to the defense, let's take a quick detour into special teams, because I did see you wrote a story on GamecockScoop.com about Joe DeCamillis and punting and stuff, but also it sounds like there's still some question marks on who's going to be the starting kicker week 1.
Yep. So go backwards before we go forwards here. The story about that was we had Kai Kroger on Wednesday, and he was not bad last year, but not as good as he was in 2022. And he basically just explained that, look, my elbow was in the wrong spot last year. It was messing up my drops, hitting the ball at the wrong angle. And he said Joe D's just helped him sort his elbow out. He's been doing elbow work all offseason to get his drops better for punting. So take that for what it's worth. We'll see what it means when they're actually punting again, or when he's punting again. As for the kicker battle, that was not an area Beamer seemed too pleased with on Saturday. He mentioned there was a missed field goal in the scrimmage. Obviously didn't say who, but said there was a missed kick. He said both guys, sounds like it's William Joyce and Alex Herrera right now are the two who are mostly in that battle. It's Mason Love's doing more punting right now, although he might have a chance to kick next year. It's kind of gone back and forth. We've had Herrera, we've had Joyce. They've both talked about, some things that are going well. Beamer said they've both had some good days, but also both missed some opportunities. I don't think this thing's anywhere close to settled right now. And I guess if you want to be worried, that's fair. I don't think they know who their starting kicker is right now. And we talked about it last week on the show a little bit, so I won't spend too much time on it. But I think that thing's as wide open as any position battle on the roster right now.
Well, and kicking is just such a weird position anyway, right? Because I feel like you could be the better person at practice, and then once the lights are on, once there's any sort of pressure, like true game pressure, things could look a little bit different. So we'll have to see, and maybe both guys get a shot at some point in the Old Dominion game or whatever. I think, I don't know. They're both talented based on their prestige or whatever coming out of high school, and we know that Herrera kind of pushed it to the wire with Mitch Jeter a couple years ago. But yeah, the question is just going to be, once those lights come on, who has the fortitude, I guess, to make a clutch kick when needed.
That's about all I had on the special teams. We'll get more into that. We should get coordinators on Wednesday. Hopefully that includes Joe D. I wanted to move on to one other thing with the defense that we haven't talked about, I think, at all on any of these podcasts with related to the depth chart, but I think it's worth discussing. And it came up at press conference this week. Nick and DQ, I think that's as much as anything on the roster that's you're given. Those are your starting two safeties. The depth at safety right now is probably not maybe what you want or what you need. So David Spalding got asked, we had him on Wednesday, about who else is working at safety right now behind Nick and DQ. And the names he rattled off, I'll just give them to you right here. Jalen Kilgore, Gerald Kilgore, King Dominion Ford, Buddy Mack, Peyton Williams, David Busey. Now, Kilgore's played some safety. Jalen has, but he's working at nickel mostly, and he's going to be starting at nickel. So you'd have to take him out of that spot if something happened to Nick or DQ. Gerald Kilgore's talented, but he's an FCS transfer. King Dominion Ford's barely played here. Buddy Mack played a little bit at Pitt, but he's still a walk-on at the end of the day. Peyton Williams, I don't think he played at all last year. He played a little bit at the end of 2022. David Busey is a true freshman. Have we not given enough credit to maybe there's an issue or at least a question about safety too deep after Nick and DQ?
Well, especially since we've seen a game one injury at that position both of the last 2 years too. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good point. I do think probably what they would do is move Jalen Kilgore to whichever safety spot first, because I do think you have a little bit more depth at nickel. You even, I think, can think about a guy like Lewis Solomon who plays some corner, but also could play that nickel spot. If he comes in or if he continues to develop and be the level of talent that I kind of expect him to be based on what he was in high school. Peyton Williams is another one that's kind of intriguing to me because he was a highly rated guy, has made an impact on the field, but then, like you said, was kind of I can't remember if it's injury or what was going on there, but was
last year,
kind of MIA last year. I think a lot of those guys could stand in, but to me, Jalen Kilgore is the one that is maybe the most or the least drop off between those guys. And then you just have to see what would happen to nickel.
Yeah, that I guess while we're on the subject, you might as well. If you put Jalen back at safety, is that David Spalding spot at nickel? He's only working at corner right now, but he has played nickel in the past. Is that, like you said, Jalewis Solomon? You throwing him right there as a true freshman? I don't know if you have a backup at nickel in your mind right now.
I mean, that would be 3 years in a row that a true freshman had to step up because of a safety going down, right?
We haven't even mentioned Kelvin Hunter, but
yeah, I mean, that could be interesting too. Definitely projected as a safety coming out of high school, but he didn't get mentioned by DQ,
right? He did not.
Yeah, so maybe he's not quite as far along, or maybe DQ just for.
Or maybe he's working at nickel, not safety.
Yeah, exactly. So, I do think it's something to be aware of. I think you have the bodies there, but maybe there's going to be. I don't know that I would say that there's a drop off if you put Jalen there, but it at least makes things a little complicated for sure.
I'd go with that.
Another thing I wanted to talk about defensively, it sounds like the edge group continues to impress. I thought they had a pretty good spring game last time we were able to see them kind of compete. And then Kyle Kennard talked yesterday about them getting a lot of sacks in the scrimmage, I guess, but not getting complacent. And he called Dylan Stewart a freak of nature, which I tend to agree with. I guess we're continuing to hear positive returns about that front 6 or 7, and the sort of impact that they can have on quarterbacks.
Yeah, I'm just going to put this to you because you've been around here longer than me. Deepest defensive line in South Carolina since blank.
Sorry, real quick, I will answer that, but I did want to give William Dean the shout out for the comment. He said, "How about Gary Busey?" I think it's Gary. I mean, not Gary, David Bucky, but I understand the joke there. I do think he's a talented, but again, that's you throwing a true freshman in there, which is probably not the most ideal if you can help it. All right, deepest D-line group since. I mean, I said it earlier, probably 2013.
Yeah.
And a little bit different makeup there. I think you were built around your edge rushers like Clowney and Melvin Ingram. The year before that, you also had, his name escapes me right now. Another really tall, lanky, good edge.
And Antonio Allen?
No, he played like that sort of spur position. but also was very talented. But there was another true like defensive end type that is escaping me right now. Anyway, so yeah, probably that group, and I would say this group, the strength still lies on the interior, but you have some pretty intriguing names on the outside that have some upside that you have not had for quite a long time, I think.
Yeah, I just think the whole thing with it is, 60 to 70 snaps a game on defense most weeks. And how many times have we looked at the PFF on a Sunday and it's been Boogie Huntley 55 snaps, TJ Sanders 52 snaps, Tonka Hemingway 60 snaps, whatever. I just don't think you're gonna have to do that this year, like straight up. I think there is a question of who your best guys are, who you want out there with the game on the line, that kind of thing. But I just think all of these guys are going to be able to play 30 to 40 snaps a game as opposed to 50 to 60, and it's going to end up helping all of them. That was also something Kyle Kennard brought up, point blank, that he played about 75% of the snaps in the game when he was at Georgia Tech, and he wanted to do that here. I think that's as helpful as anything. Like, he hasn't been talked about a ton, but that's a Power 5 pass rusher who I think we were pretty high on in the winter when he came here. Gilbert Edmond, same.
I was probably most excited. No, just Kennard. I was probably most excited about out of the portal on that D line, and then especially because I wasn't sure just how quickly Dylan Stewart would come along. I think maybe I am more excited about Stewart now, but that doesn't mean I'm not excited about Kennard. He's proven it at a Power 5 level.
Yeah, and then Gilbert Edmond, again, he's one of those guys 2 years ago when he's here, he's playing 50, 60 snaps a game. That's not going to happen this year. I certainly wouldn't imagine it will anyway, and not because of anything he's doing wrong, but you've got, Brian Thomas Jr., who is probably the best defensive player in the spring game. He's going to be at edge. Kennard, Stewart, obviously, like you mentioned. Jachias Gear, we haven't talked about. Elijah Davis. I think there's so many bodies and so many different combinations you feel okay about having out there.
Well, and even all those names that you just mentioned, I'm looking at some of the quotes from DeAndre Jules yesterday.
Oh, yeah, good point.
And he was talking about sleepers on the defensive line. He included himself, which I really like, to have the confidence to do that. But he also mentioned Nick Barrett and Monkel Goodwine. So you're talking about three guys there, and Goodwine, Barrett, and Jules, who have had some quality snaps at Power 5 programs. Obviously, Barrett here. Goodwine, up and coming at Alabama because he's a little bit younger, but was recruited at Alabama. And then Jules has already had quite a career at Pittsburgh, who, has a pretty good defensive mind, and Pat Narduzzi. So, and that's maybe your third line.
I was going to say, I think you probably I don't know how exactly you set it up, but if you probably have two D tackles in the field at a given moment, that's Boogie and Tonka line one. Again, to use the hockey shifts thing that we heard last week, Boogie and Tonka line one, TJ and Nick Barrett line two, Goodwine and Jules line three. That's probably how you would do it, or maybe different combinations. But those six are your 1 through 3 lines. That's something a lot of teams aren't going to have. And again, is there a unit you feel better about than D line? Maybe that's the way to put it.
No, no, probably not. I mean, we did talk up the tight ends earlier, and I think they're maybe deeper and further along than I expected, because we didn't even mention, Nick Elksness, who I've heard some positive returns on, Connor Cox, Reed McKeska. Those are all highly rated guys as well. And I think, they're probably battling it out for third string at this point.
Yeah.
Which is not saying anything bad about them. I think you're just feeling pretty good about that tight end spot. So, but still, it's hard to beat what you just laid out as far as the vision for the D line, and that's why I have so much confidence, I think, about this defense being one of, I'm just going to say, top half of the SEC. I mean, maybe they're 6th or 7th or whatever, but still top half of the SEC. Is, even if you have an injury or two, I think you just have guys waiting in the wings in a way that you have not had in a very, very long time.
Yeah, and then that kind of runs back to the other side we talked about earlier, right? Is if your defense can get teams off the field, if your offense can hold the ball 35 minutes a game and limit possessions, and if you feel confident on most weeks that 24 points might get you where you need to go, I think this kind of plays exactly how you want it to. I just keep coming back. I know it's maybe it's cliche with Rocket and Dowell Loggins. I just keep coming back to that kind of Arkansas model. The Sam Pittman before Sam Pittman kind of fell off a cliff at Arkansas. That like 2021, 2022 thing. Again, 22 would be the easy comparison because Rocket. I know that team only went 6-6, but they were pretty competitive in most games. Lost a 2-point. I'm looking at it now. A 2-point game to A&M, a 3-point game to LSU, a 2-point game to Missouri.
They had some injuries down the stretch of that season too, if I recall.
Garrison got hurt for a little bit. Or even you go the year before, maybe this is your like optimistic look. 2021 Arkansas goes 8-4 in the regular season, then wins a bowl game. 7-point loss to Alabama, 1-point loss to Ole Miss in there. I don't think your offensive line is maybe as good as those Arkansas teams had, at least not yet. But I can also see what you're trying to do.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good way to put it. And yeah, don't hear what we're not saying. Not trying to hype you up too much. It just seems like there is a vision starting to click into place where I can have some kind of optimistic takes. It very much depends on the defense being what I think it's going to be. And it very much depends on you being able to piece together a run game, which, I think the offensive line is talented. Last year, the freshman who stepped in did a really admirable job stepping in, but I would say that their strength was more in pass blocking, which is usually the case with younger guys. So they're going to need to develop, and you're going to need to have some guys that can get out there and run ahead of your running back and make some space. So haven't seen it yet. I mean, maybe some flashes of it in the spring game, but we really didn't have your full running back repertoire at that point, so it's kind of hard to know.
All right, people are feeling good. Should we talk about one of the toughest games in the schedule now?
Yeah, so if you've been listening to us over the summer, at the end of every episode for a while now, we've been breaking down the South Carolina schedule, and we are finally to week, 11?
Week 12 on the schedule.
Week
it's game
12.
10.
Yeah, week 12. And that is Missouri. And honestly, for whatever reason in my mind, when I see Missouri on the schedule, I still kind of am like, oh, that's a toss-up game. But when you look at the recent, I don't know. That's the way it works in my brain. But when you look at the recent history, Shane Beamer has never beaten Missouri. Missouri's won 5 straight. Really, some of probably the worst showings of the Shane Beamer era have been against Missouri, including last year when they got absolutely boat raced in a 34-12 shellacking in Columbia, Missouri. And it seems like Missouri is kind of a hot pick for a dark horse playoff team this year, heading into the season. So it'd be hard for me to project things to go very well again. But yeah, what do you think about the 2024 Mizzou Tigers? Are they just the media darling, but they're not going to be able to live up to the hype, or do you really see a path for them to make the playoffs?
So here's the thing. I think I'm kind of one foot in each bucket here right now. I'm not sure if Missouri's, I don't know what they are. What are they in the preseason poll? 11, the 11th best team in the country. But are you aware of what Missouri's schedule is? Because this was a pretty hot topic at SEC Media Days. Have you looked at the whole thing? Because I have it open now, but
I haven't. Read it off to me real quick.
Okay, so they go Murray State, shout out Jody Wright, Buffalo, shout out Pete Lembo, Boston College, Vanderbilt, A&M, UMass in week 7 for some reason, Auburn at home, Alabama, Oklahoma at home, South Carolina, Mississippi State, Arkansas. Not only is their non-con featuring UMass, Buffalo, and Murray State, they are the only team in the entire SEC who got all 4 teams picked 13th through 16th on their schedule, which is why, whether it's fair or not, they did objectively get the easiest draw for the SEC and their non-con soft. And they get, one of their biggest SEC games is Oklahoma. That's at home.
I'll say, read me those.
I get why they're a playoff dark horse, even if I don't think they're quite that good. I get it.
Read me those difficult ones again. At Alabama or home?
At Alabama, they get Oklahoma at their place, and at A&M are probably the only 3 games they may, and they'll probably still be favored against A&M, but they'll be favored probably by at least a touchdown in every other game.
I was about to say they should, based on what you just read, they should be favored in their first 7 games.
At Alabama is game number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I would imagine they'll be a touchdown favorite in every game before that.
That's Pretty wild. No, okay, so I hadn't heard that. So maybe I would also have them as a dark horse playoff team pick, even if they're not quite as good as maybe they could be or whatever. That's just a nice schedule.
I will say for the actual roster, though, because you did ask, I didn't answer your
Yeah.
question. Brady Cook's back, and so is Luther Burden, who's probably the best wide receiver in America. So that alone's a pretty good one, too, right there.
Yeah, and I think something about Cook, because to me, he's someone that does not jump off the screen at all. But something that does jump off the screen is he only threw 6 interceptions last year.
Yep.
He takes care of the football. They scored 32.5 points per game last year, which is plenty. And on defense, they're pretty good. Again, as always, they have Johnny Walker at edge again, who continues to just wreak havoc in SEC backfields. They also, I guess, when I was looking through, if I saw a weakness, it was their corners. So they have a couple
lose
safeties.
Chris Abrams-Drain to the NFL.
Yeah, exactly. And Innis Rakestraw, who was their starter on the other side. They brought in Clemson transfer Toriano Pride, which might fill in one of those spots, but the safeties are still pretty good coming back from last year, but there's some question marks at corner. So if you can protect against Johnny Walker long enough to have some down the field routes open up, maybe you can beat them over the top every now and then. But it's a pretty solid team on both sides of the ball, I think.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd say is, we were talking about on the LSU episode that LSU has a new defensive coordinator. That was Missouri's Blake Baker. So Mizzou is replacing a coordinator. I don't imagine for a Week 12 game that's a very big thing. By then, you're pretty well figured out, but still worth noting. Yeah, this is a really solid up and down team that South Carolina hasn't been able to beat this decade, really. It's going to be a big game. I would have to imagine that by the time we get to this point in the year, Missouri's probably 8-1, like 7-2 at worst. They're still in the mix in a 12-team playoff with only 1 or 2 losses. It's the last kind of big home game. You have Wofford the next week, but it's Wofford. So it's kind of your last big home game. It's a team that's going to be coming in with something to play for, probably. I certainly wouldn't pick South Carolina to beat Missouri sitting here today, but it's also the type of thing South Carolina would do to mess up Missouri, just thinking about 2013.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like a spot that South Carolina is probably going to be in a must-win-ish scenario. If the season plays out about what we've been projecting along the way, you have that really rough October. You have A&M and then Vandy. Maybe you get a win, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if you're sitting at like 4-6 heading into this game,
through
or
9 games. That's kind of the thing, though. Like if you're 4-5 going into this game because you're through 9, 5, yeah. I mean, this is a shot to. You have Wofford the next week, which you would. If it gets to that point, you're basically thinking you got to beat either Missouri or Clemson to get to a bowl game. And
right.
This is your home shot at that because Clemson's a road game. So, if that's how it plays out, this is a huge game for South Carolina. Even if you're 5-4, you're probably going to beat Wofford the next week. But you beat Mizzou and then you beat Wofford. Then you got 7, then you're on a winning streak going into Clemson. And I think the whole complexion of the year changes. So this is probably going to be a pretty big game on both sides, you would think.
Yeah, it feels like the back half of the schedule's Kentucky game in the sense that it's kind of a crux game.
It's a good way to look at it.
Although I think you probably have a better shot against Kentucky. Not that I think that this is an impossible task. You have them at home. There are some places to exploit. I think Brady Cook's going to do well. I think Luther Burden's going to do well. I'm interested to see what their run game looks like. They
did lose Cody Schrader. We did mention that. That's a good point.
They did bring in Marcus Carroll. If you feel like that name sounds vaguely familiar, that's because he ran against you at Georgia State 2 years ago. And they brought in someone from App State, Nate Noel. So both of those guys are making a move up to SEC level competition. Maybe between the two of them, they can get close to Schrader's production. But Schrader's just one of those like grinded out. Who was that guy at Kentucky forever? I felt like he played like 5 years where he just always fell forward. It was not like Benny Snell. That's exactly it. Cody Schrader felt like that guy, where it was like, if you need 3 yards, he's going to get you 3 yards every single time. There's no stopping him from falling forward for 3 yards. And that's a skill. Like it may not look very pretty, but it is something that doesn't come in every single running back. So it'll be interesting to see if they have the same level of production on the ground. Either way, they're going to be pretty good, and it should be a good game.
Did you want to spend 1 minute on Wofford this week or 1 minute on Wofford next week before we do Clemson?
I haven't done any Wofford research, so we can
Yeah, I
spend 1
haven't
minute
either,
on.
but I know they went like 2-9 last year.
Yeah, we'll spend 1 minute on Wofford next week before we talk about Clemson, and then the next week, guess what? We get to talk about a real opponent. We get to start to preview Old Dominion. In the meantime, we'll have plenty of content on GamecockScoop.com. If you want to read my Wofford preview, it'll be up this weekend. It's going to be very fun. And like I said, make sure you take advantage of the 75% off annual subscription. It expires tomorrow. So if you're listening, Camp Scoop 24, all capital, on GamecockScoop.com to get that deal. It's also, there's a banner on the top of the page on GamecockScoop.com. You can just click that. It'll take you right there. Anyway, we will be back next week with the GamecockScoop.com podcast. In the meantime, we'll see you.